now famous Emoluments Clause was not so famous 6 months ago. But we are joining together, nearly 200 of us, to force the President of the United States to obey the Constitution. It really is that simple. We are joining together to force the President of the United States to comply with the Emoluments Clause, which says that he cannot take any payment or benefit of any kind whatever. That's the Constitution's words, of any kind whatever, without the consent of Congress. Those words also come from the Constitution. No payment or benefit of any kind whatever without the consent of Congress. He is flagrantly and blatantly violating the Emoluments Clause, not just once, but repeatedly and continuously, when he takes payments for commercial and residential space from governments like Saudi Arabia, when he takes trademarks from China, nearly 40 of them worth millions of dollars from China, but also from other countries, and we've learned recently a portfolio of them from Russia. When he takes permits from India and other countries where he has developments, and when he has what he calls a little conflict of interest, his words, because he has, quote, a major building in Turkey that has been developed through the permits and permissions that he's received from that country. These revelations have come mostly through the press, and we can thank the press. For example, USA Today recently revealed that 70% of the Trump buyers of the companies that are buyers of Trump properties in the last 12 months have been limited liability companies that can hide their owners. So the bottom line is we have no clue as to most of the investors and partners of Donald Trump around the world. We have no accurate and complete knowledge about all those payments and benefits because he has made no disclosure. The Constitution of the United States says Congress must consent. We cannot consent to what we don't know. We cannot consent to what Donald Trump has concealed. And he owes the Congress that disclosure. But we have a unique role and responsibility, which gives us a unique role in court, a position of standing and trust that no one else has. And that's important for Donald Trump to understand and also for the courts. And we have not only standing, but we have a responsibility to bring this lawsuit because it is one of the main ways that we can do, as the framers intended, to prevent corruption. The American people have a right to know when the President of the United States sends troops into harm's way or concludes trade agreements that he is putting the national interest before his own self-interest, that our country's interest is put before his personal financial interest. And this Emoluments Clause was the premier anti-corruption provision of the Constitution, and it is the major provision of our law to fight corruption. The founders could not have foreseen cyber hacking or the Russian cyber attacks on this country, but they did foresee the possibility that Russian influence, Russian money pouring into Trump companies, one of his sons referred to it that way, might have an influence on decisions made by the president. And likewise, money flowing from other countries as well. So we have that responsibility because we have a unique role and responsibility. We have a unique position of trust and standing legally. There's a line of cases that says the failure of the executive branch to permit the legislative branch to vote, in effect, nullifies those votes in a way that gives us standing. And our plea to the courts is enforce the Constitution against the president, compel him to obey the Emoluments Clause, to prevent corruption and undue foreign influence as the founders foresaw would be necessary. And I am very, very proud of the work that we have done. I want to thank particularly Representative Conyers, but every member standing with me here has played a very central role, and I think they are to be commended and thanked. And most important, thank you to the framers for giving us this document and the Emoluments Clause, which will have as much life today as it did back then, maybe even more so. Certainly, it will have an impact on a scale and scope because of Donald Trump's magnitude of potential conflicts of interest that it could never have had back then. We have an order of speaking, and I would first like to introduce Congressman Conyers, to be followed by Elizabeth Wydra, who is the president of the Constitution Accountability Center, who are our lawyers, Senator Leahy, Congressman Nadler, Senator Udall, Congressman Cohn, Senator Duckworth, Congresswoman Clark, and then we'll take some questions.
Top of the afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. What an honor it is for us to be with this one senator who saw Article 1, Section 9, and decided he would make something of it, and we quickly followed suit. 166 members of Congress, 30 senators, and still growing. It's still open. And this is the greatest number of plaintiffs that any single lawsuit against a president in our nation's history. And so since we filed the lawsuit, 3 more House Democrats, I'm told, have joined, and we have invited our Republican colleagues to come with us. We don't do this out of any sense of partisanship, but because President Trump has left us absolutely no other option. You know, this is not a complex legal matter. It is not a issue over which there is disagreement or the interpretation is in different areas. But for generations, both parties have complied with the Foreign Emoluments Clause by either divesting their business and financial holdings or coming to Congress to seek approval prior to receiving any foreign government payment or other benefits. The current president has done neither. Indeed, he's not even bothering to track profits earned from foreign governments at his hotels, as he promised to do last January. And moreover, on the very day that he filed this lawsuit, that we filed this lawsuit, the Chinese government provisionally approved 9 trademarks for the Trump Organization that had previously been rejected at a time when the president has softened his previous rhetoric about China and has gone back on his promise to label China a currency manipulator. Making matters worse is the complete lack of transparency by the administration of any form of oversight by the majority in the Congress. In May of this year, I sent another letter along with my colleagues on the House Judiciary Committee to President Trump, other letters have been sent concerning payments he received from foreign governments. And to date, we've received no response. And look, it boils down to this. He either doesn't know or doesn't care. You could just read the New York Times to get the drift of where we're going. You don't even need a staff. But President was right when he said there was a cloud over his presidency, but he is the cloud. The result is of his own making and is unprecedented. And of course, is keeping Americans in the dark. And so I'm very, very proud to join you, Senator, and all my colleagues for this incredibly important statement that we're making to one of the least popular presidents in my experience. So I thank you so
very
much.
much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Wydra, and I'm president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, a public interest law firm and think tank here in DC. I want to say how proud we are all to represent this wonderful group of concerned members of Congress, Senator Blumenthal, Representative Conyers, all of you here today, and of course the rest of the nearly 200 members of Congress who have filed in this historic lawsuit. My organization, the Constitutional Accountability Center, is an aptly named group to represent the members of Congress in this case, because the action is really all about constitutional accountability, holding President Donald Trump accountable to the words of the Constitution, to ensure that America's leaders act in the public's best interest and not their own, holding President Trump accountable to the oversight of Congress written into the very words, as you can see right here, of our founding charter. I want to reiterate a principle that I think is really important. President Donald Trump is not above the law. President Trump is not above the Constitution. The words of the Constitution require President Trump to come to Congress, the people's representatives, to get their consent before accepting any payments or benefits from foreign governments. By refusing to do this time after time, President Trump is thumbing his nose at the Constitution. He is taking away Congress's clearly defined duty to either grant or deny permission to accept foreign benefits from foreign powers or their instrumentalities. Congress cannot enforce this provision on its own. That is why we are calling on America's courts to step in, to direct this president to follow the Constitution's clear command to come to Congress with full transparency and show exactly what foreign emoluments he has been and is receiving, and ask Congress's consent to receive them as the Constitution requires. Thank you again for being with us. It's an honor to represent all of you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Senator Leahy.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank Senator Blumenthal. You should see him working in the Senate, talking to senator after senator. And John, you've done the same over in the House. Senator Blumenthal was former Attorney General. He knows the law as well or better than any of us. And he said this is historic. I agree, it's historic because this is the first time since the Constitution was adopted that we had to do this. It is the first time that a president says whatever presidents did before in following the Constitution doesn't apply to me because I'm above the Constitution. Nobody's above it. Nobody's above the law. Every member of Congress has to follow it. Every one of you has to follow it. The president has to follow it. And he's ignoring this. It's a constitutional safeguard that protects us all. Now, we do know from what we've heard is that a number of foreign governments believe spending money at the Trump Organization is a wise investment, and there's reason to be concerned. whether it's the sudden acceptance of their request for intellectual property protection, to the reaction of a strongman in Turkey, and then we find out that Russia, and we found out not from President Trump, but we found out from Russia that they extended 4 trademarks owned by President Trump, and they did it on Election Day. What an amazing coincidence. We also learned the share of Trump properties sold to shell corporations, which hides the buyers' identities, has gone from 4% to 70% in this past year. Now, we can go through all these examples, and there's so many more, but there's one thing we cannot forget. Complying with the Constitution is not optional. The American people and our constitutional form of government deserve a president who acts solely in the public interest, not in his own personal interest, and a president, when he takes the oath of office to uphold the Constitution, realize it applies to him as well as everybody else. So, Dick, thank you for inviting me.
Excellent.
Congressman Nadler. Thank you. I start by thanking Senator Blumenthal and Congressman Conyers for leading this effort to ensure that no president is above the law, including this president. Since the day he was sworn into office, President Trump has brazenly flouted the Constitution, which is absolutely clear that the president cannot accept any gift or emolument of any kind from a foreign state without the consent of Congress. In his acceptance of these emoluments, without first obtaining approval from Congress, as the Constitution requires in Article 1, Section 9, which is on the sign over there, President Trump has deprived Congress of the ability to carry out this duty of approval or disapproval. That is why we filed this lawsuit. Under the Constitution, it is our duty as members of Congress to determine whether the president can accept any emolument so that we can protect the nation against improper foreign influence, which may run counter to the interests of the United States. We are being denied that opportunity, and through us, the people of the United States are being denied that opportunity, and we need the courts to protect our rights and the rights of the people of the United States to the full faith and efforts of the president, not undermined by private interests. President Trump has not requested the permission of Congress to receive any emolument. He has not even made the basic disclosures or divested his assets in an appropriate way, as presidents have always done in the past, to remove any areas of potential liabilities or possible conflicts of interest. In hosting foreign dignitaries at his hotel just blocks away from the White House, in receiving valuable trademarks from China, in continuing to bring in millions of dollars a year through his businesses from foreign powers all over the world, in getting permissions to erect buildings in Turkey and other countries, Donald Trump has put a for sale sign around the presidency, around his administration, and around his decision-making. Are the decisions of this administration being made with the interests of the American people first and foremost in the mind of the president? Are the policies and positions of this administration being affected by their impacts on the president's bank account, according to who pays and who doesn't? Foreign governments know that there is a clear avenue to put money directly in the pocket of the president. It is not only fair but critically important for our nation to ask the question, what is the influence on the president? It is an issue of real urgency given the threats to our national security, to our independence, and to the integrity of our democracy. I want to thank the Constitutional Accountability Center for working with us to file this lawsuit. We believe we stand on firm legal ground, but it is true that there is very little case law on the emoluments clause. That is because no previous president has dared even come close to testing this issue. They have all until now respected their duty to Congress and to the American people to be transparent and to put the nation's interests before the interests of their own pockets. This White House seems to believe it can play by its own rules, but we are asking the courts to show once and for all that nothing trumps the Constitution. Thank you.
Very, very good.
Senator Udall.
Thank you very much. And Senator Blumenthal and Chairman Conyers, I say Chairman Conyers because that's the way you were when I worked with you in the House. And Senator Blumenthal and I go back long ways. We worked as attorneys general, and he's one of the very best lawyers I've ever known. Let me talk a little bit about why the American people should care about this issue. The founders knew our country could not survive if the president used his public office for private gain. They also understood the danger of foreign influence on our government officials. The founders believed that corruption was one of the gravest threats to the new nation. And in drafting the Constitution, they viewed anti-corruption measures, such as the Emoluments Clause, as essential to preserving an enduring Republican system of government. Of particular concern was the risk that foreign states could use bribes and payments to influence our leaders. They feared that if the president was allowed to accept benefits from a foreign government, the American people could not trust he was making decisions in their best interests. Fortunately, throughout our history, this has rarely been a problem. But as with many things, President Trump has taken us into uncharted territory. Today, because of his continued and unknown business interests, we don't know what motivates President Trump's decision-making. When he makes major policy decisions, is it in the interest of the nation or to help facilitate a business deal in the Middle East? When he declines to exert pressure on a country with human rights abuses, is it because he's seeking trademarks in that country? When decisions are made about military deployments or trade deals or sanctions, how can we know if President Trump is basing them on the interests of the American people, not on his own personal interests? That is exactly what our founders tried to prevent. And they gave the president a means to address this problem. Bring the benefits he receives before Congress and let us do our constitutional duty to give or withhold our consent. The president should not be the judge of his own integrity. He needs to respect our role as a co-equal branch. This boils down to a very simple principle, and one all Americans, regardless of party, should embrace. Our nation's leaders must always put the interests of the country above their own private interests. Right now, we can't know if President Trump is doing that, and that's what this suit is all about. And at this point, I turn it over to Congressman Cohen. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon. It's an honor to be here with Senators Blumenthal and Udall and Leahy and my chairman, John Conyers, and my other colleagues from the House. This isn't a special day when Congress stands up with attorneys from the private bar who are doing their part to see to it that the president is checked and balanced through the systems that we have. So many of them have come through the courts, and the courts have held themselves up as stalwarts of democracy and supporters of the Constitution. Our Constitution and indeed our country and our democracy are in jeopardy because of the actions of the man who presently holds the office of President of the United States. The Emoluments Clause is a serious part of our Constitution. When President John Kennedy was offered an honorary citizenship by his native nation of origin through his ancestors of Ireland, he asked the Justice Department if he could accept it. And they said he couldn't because it would be an emolument. That's what a president with character and judgment and understanding of the Constitution and a concern with abiding by the law does. He asks legal advice to see if something is appropriate or not. Something as small as an honorary citizenship, John Kennedy, because of the Emoluments Clause, asked, is this permissible? And when he found out it wasn't, he didn't accept it. This president will accept anything, anything. The issue is not America first, it's is America even second. We know Trump is first. That's a serious issue. This man, before he became president, had a duty to abide by civil law and criminal law as well. Civil contracts. And we don't know that he abided by most of his civil contracts. There were few contracts that he didn't break, that people didn't have to go to court to try to enforce. Vows weren't important to him either. Leopards do not change their spots. And when an individual has Roy Cohn as their Obi-Wan Kenobi, you know you have to be vigilant and bring Emoluments Clause actions to see to it that their actions are putting America first. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Duckworth.
John, I'm going to need a little room. Sorry.
Let me take this.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up. I'm just going to stand up.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you. There we go. Thank you. Before he took office, President Trump had every opportunity to reassure the American people that he would not profit from his role in government. He could have placed his assets in a blind trust. He could have divested from his businesses and relinquished ownership. He could have handed the Trump enterprise over to be run by someone outside of his own family, but he didn't. And that should concern every single American. You see, by maintaining his interest in the Trump Organization, every single time one of his hotels receives a payment from a foreign government, the president is potentially in violation of the Constitution's anti-corruption emoluments provision. When the president decided to go easy on China's unfair trade practices and pledge to honor the One China policy, it was fair for us to ask, was he influenced by the Chinese government to grant the Trump Organization dozens of new trademarks, potentially worth tens of millions of dollars? As the president cozies up to the royal family of Saudi Arabia, it is fair for us to ask, is he being influenced by how the Saudi government spent hundreds of thousands of dollars at the president's own hotel as part of a single lobbying campaign? As the president repeatedly praises the totalitarian leader of the Philippines, a man who has condoned and incite murder, it is fair for us to ask, has he been influenced by the Trump Organization's applications for patents in the Philippines, or by the soon-to-be-completed $150 million Trump Tower in Manila? It should never be a question whether the President of the United States is doing what's best for himself versus what's best for the American people. That's why the Constitution requires him to come before Congress before he accepts benefits or other emoluments from foreign governments. This isn't something that the Constitution says Congress has to ask for, though we, of course, have asked him many times. The Constitution actually requires the president to go to Congress first to help ensure the president is asking in the best interest of the public, not his own. He took an oath, and I was there on that day, that cold day in January, when he took the oath of office. And just like I did for 23 years in uniform, I swore to defend the Constitution of the United States. He took this oath as president, and he is now our commander-in-chief. And men and women in uniform have considered it their duty, their honor, to defend this very same Constitution. And in just the time that the president has been in office, our heroes have laid down their lives and have bled to protect and defend this Constitution. So with this lawsuit, we are asking the courts to remind the president of his oath. We are asking the courts to remind the president that he swore to the American people on the steps of the Capitol that the Constitution comes first. The good of the country comes before his own business interest. And on behalf of all the men and women who have bled to protect and defend this country in uniform, I want to remind him that there are men and women out there who are bleeding and dying for this Constitution who don't get a penny back, for their own business interests. And he needs to remember that. And I'm so proud and pleased to be able to introduce my good friend, Catherine Clark.
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Senator Blumenthal, Representative Conyers, all my colleagues for being here today and for their work to ensure that we remain a country based on the rule of law. For that is the principle upon which our democracy and our great nation is built. Our nation's founders knew the threat that corruption and foreign influence had on a democracy. They protected our country by requiring office holders to obtain approval from Congress before accepting anything of value from a foreign government. President Trump has thumbed his nose at the Constitution and this requirement. He has accepted fees, rent, trademarks, and permits from foreign governments and not once sought the consent of Congress. This is unprecedented, unconstitutional, and un-American. Let's be clear. The Constitution requires that the president come to us and that he has the obligation to ask for a waiver. We have tried to get him to do just what he is required to do under the Constitution. We have made repeated calls for transparency and compliance. We've called for the release of White House visitor logs, for divestment of business holdings, and the president's tax returns. The president's response has been continued secrecy and reckless disregard for his constitutional responsibilities. There's been a lot of talk coming from the White House about loyalty. It's time that the president clarifies his own. Is he loyal to us, the American people, to our Constitution, or has he put our country on the auction block for the highest foreign bidder? Today, we are asking the courts to help us answer these critical questions. We are delighted to be here together, and we thank you for your interest, and I will turn it back over to Senator Blumenthal for your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Congresswoman Clark. We're going to have one more speaker before questions.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal, Ranking Member Conyers. It is an honor to be here. It's unfortunate that it has come to this point, but I am honored and proud to be a part of this effort. We have tried time and time again to ask the President to live up to his responsibilities and his oath to the Constitution. Every one of us in this room, all of my colleagues, took an oath to defend the Constitution. The founders, in their wisdom, understood the importance of the integrity of the foundations of our democracy, and the President, time and time again, flaunts those foundations. It's unfortunate that we are at the point that we have to turn to the courts, but at this point, we have no other choice. So I thank Senator Blumenthal, Ranking Member Conyers, and all of my colleagues, and I look for the President to do the right thing. Thank you.
Happy to take your questions.
Just, do you think that the court might respond to this by saying, you know, Congress is a co-equal branch and it's really up to Congress if to do something about this? There have been, as far as I'm aware, no hearings. There's been legislation introduced, but there's been no action on any legislation that would deal with this. Why can't Congress deal with this issue? Why do you have to go to court to deal with it?
Well, I'll take a crack at it, and then Congressman Conyers or Elizabeth or any of our colleagues. The Emoluments Clause doesn't say that Congress has to pass legislation. It says that the President has to seek consent from Congress. And there is a line of cases that say essentially when the President denies Congress the opportunity to vote, then members of Congress have standing. Senator Goldwater sued President Carter when he abrogated the treaty with Taiwan unilaterally, and he was accorded standing. Senator Kennedy sued because of a pocket veto. Other members of Congress have successfully sued, and state legislators have sued executive branch members because their votes were nullified. And so the enforcement of this clause really is our responsibility to do in this way. Because after all, if we were to pass a statute, it's the Constitution that is the highest law of the land, and that's what the courts would be enforcing if the President refuses to follow it. His refusing to follow the Constitution is the ultimate contempt for law and for the rule of law. And as one of my colleagues mentioned, there's nothing novel about presidents coming to Congress and seeking permission, whether it's Andrew Jackson or President Obama or other presidents on much more limited emoluments. The difference here is simply the scope and scale of President Trump's ownership in more than 500 companies in 20 countries around the world, worth billions of dollars, and taking millions of dollars in payments and benefits. And he has an obligation, no matter how complex it may be, to comply with the law.
Have you asked for hearings? Have you asked for any kind of oversight? And have the Republicans' leadership refused that?
Well, there's no need for hearings. He has to first come to Congress and make disclosures. We can't have hearings on what we don't know. Yeah.
What's the next step if this suit continues? I mean, what is the next legal step, and what sorts of information would you be asking from the White House in discovery and
Well,
pre-trial?
the next step will be to consider whatever the response of President Trump is. Our hope, of course, is that he heeds the law, makes disclosure, comes to us for consent, and we'll have to consider whatever his payments and benefits are that he wants approval from Congress to do. Based on our experience, and by the way, we have made about 20 requests for disclosure of varying kinds. Members of both the House and the Senate have made requests in the past, and he's stonewalled us. So we have no expectation, realistically, that he's going to voluntarily comply with the Emoluments Clause. I would expect that on his behalf, the Department of Justice will probably file a motion to dismiss, and we will respond. There'll be a hearing. The judge will make a judgment. I think the law is clearly on our side, and then we will be entitled to go forward with discovery and with the remainder of the lawsuit on the merits. Is that roughly right, Elizabeth?
Absolutely.
Just, Elizabeth, by the way, has done a magnificent job. The Constitutional Accountability Center has been outstanding, and so we're very confident in the expertise of our lawyers here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to my team who's all here.
Other questions? Well, I hope the judge is as easy on us as you are. Yeah.
I have a question for Congressman Conyers, actually. The Senate Judiciary Committee has started to get involved in the Russia investigation. They're looking into obstruction of justice, among other things. Do you think that the House Judiciary Committee should take some role in this Russia investigation, whether it's obstruction of justice or some other part of this?
I do, and Jerry Nadler and I, both members of the House Judiciary Committee, have attempted this on numerous occasions to bring this to the attention of our chairman. So far, we have not been successful. It doesn't mean that we will stop. As a matter of fact, the filing of this lawsuit last Wednesday has increased the attention to the Emoluments Clause and what President Trump has been doing and not doing. And so it's not over until it's over. We're going to continue to make the pressure that is so absolutely essential in this matter. Because really, it's a matter really of whether you're in it for your own benefit, or you're doing the work and the duties of the great office of the presidency of the United States.
Can I add two things? Congressman Conyers is entirely correct. Obviously, he and I and others have been pressuring Chairman Goodlatte to say that the Judiciary Committee should get involved in this. The Judiciary Committee has jurisdiction, primary jurisdiction over the FBI, over the Department of Justice, and all questions of the proper conduct of the FBI or any officials in it, of the Department of Justice or any officials in it. All the questions of obstruction of justice are the primary jurisdiction in the House of the Judiciary Committee. And it's, frankly, in my opinion, a travesty that the Judiciary Committee and the chairman are refusing to get involved at all. I want to make one other comment on the president's conflict of interest. There have been repeated references here by almost everybody to the question of, is the president making a judgment on some issue in the interest of the people of the United States, or is he making it in the interest of some business interest or pocketbook? I want to go a little further and say that that is the kind of decision and the kind of temptation that no president should face. Even if the president believes in good faith that he is ignoring his own business interests and is deciding a given question on the basis of his perception of the interests of the United States, he should not have to balance that. It's psychologically very tempting to ignore what you think or to change your opinion to some extent of the interests of the United States based on your own interests without even realizing you're doing it. And one of the purposes of the Emoluments Clause is to say that officials of the United States government should not have that conflict of interest. Whether they yield to that conflict of interest consciously or not, it shouldn't be there.
I think that's a really important point, because the clause says, and you have it right here, it says except. He may not accept. Doesn't matter what the extent of the conflict of interest, whether it affects him or not, he cannot accept it, whatever its size. And the framers were very concerned about corruption. That was one of their major concerns. A young republic, a new nation, surrounded by hostile, wealthy powers. Their fear was that we would be endangered by corruption, foreign interference and influence. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. But Congressman Nadler is absolutely right that it doesn't matter what the consequences were. It's the acceptance that violates the law. And one last point, which is the reason why I think this lawsuit is so important. What President Trump has demonstrated repeatedly is a contempt for the rule of law. That's why the Judiciary Committee and the Senate is investigating obstruction of justice. It isn't just his financial gain or conflict of interest that raise his contempt for the rule of law. It's his firing Jim Comey after Comey refused to, in effect, let Flynn go, as he apparently asked Comey to do. Why he fired Jim Comey? Because he wouldn't give him a pledge of loyalty. The FBI is supposed to investigate violations of law. And the reason for this investigation into potential obstruction of justice, and I emphasize potential, is the threat of Donald Trump's contempt for the rule of law. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.